Hello and welcome to today's webinar series. Topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement in order to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Patton and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I'd like to welcome all of our attendees who are joining us, and a special thanks to Amanda Hall and the entire Cohesity team for helping us put on today's event. So this afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, followed by a Q&A session, and we will have some poll questions for our audience to answer as well. That being said, I want to encourage the audience to please submit those questions of your own in the Q&A section down below on this platform, and be sure to respond to the poll questions if you'd like to receive your CPE credits for attending today. With all of that out of the way now, I would like to welcome our panelists to please come on camera and go ahead and come off mute. And we're going to begin by a round of introductions. So share with us who you are, what you do, and what agency or organization you represent. So Alan Hill, let's start with you, please.
Thank you, Kristen. Alan Hill, I am the Chief Information Officer over here at the Federal Communications Commission. It is a pleasure to be here. I will tell you that it's a pleasure to be the CIO here at FCC. We are building a great resilient team and focusing on not just tomorrow's and today's threat, but the future threats 5-10 years out from now. And I'm very fortunate to have such a wonderful team to support this agency.
Fantastic, thank you. Stefan, let's hear from you next.
Hi everyone, my name is Stefan Michev. I'm the CTO of the US Patent and Trademark Office. I also am the director of the Business Product Delivery Office, where we deliver software products for our trademark, patent, and enterprise business product lines. The resilience is one of the 3 top goals that we have, and I'm so happy that we have this leadership team that allows us to prioritize this and put it as formal objectives that all the entire team is kind of focused at. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Let's jump over to Ron next.
Hello, Ron Nixon. I'm the field CISO for public sector over here at Cohesity, and my job is in my role within the company is to help organizations take a hard look at the technologies and the processes that they're applying around risk management, business resiliency, and cybersecurity, and help find the good balance between the people, processes, technology, and budget right off to the side over there. So, but yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Frank, great to see you on a panel again. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Kristen, and thanks for having me today. I appreciate being involved in these wonderful events. So my name is Frank Indiviglio. I'm the CTO at the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. My job is to introduce technology and help technology support the mission that NOAA has. And it's a big mission, right? Where our mission space is the surface of the sun to the bottom of the ocean. So a lot of science that goes on in there, and a lot of resiliency that we need to put into our technology to make all that work. So I'm happy to have this discussion, and thanks for having me again.
Yeah, thank you. And then Charles, let's hear from you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. Really excited to be here and be a part of this conversation. My name is Charles Cutshall, and I serve as the Chief Privacy Officer and Director of Open Government for the U.S. Department of Commerce. And in this role, I am the agency's senior agency official for privacy, accountable for ensuring that we are managing privacy risks and complying with privacy laws and policies across the enterprise.
Thank you. So today we are talking all about risk management, and I want to hear from each of our panelists, or at least those that are comfortable sharing. But to kick us off, we'll just kind of go back in the same order for now. Alan, love to hear from you first on this. How do you or your business define business or organizational resilience? So please share with me your perspective on this question.
I think they go hand in hand, from an organization and from a business. I'm very much about looking at things from a 360 view is what I call it. And talking to my staff, we need to look at not just the technologies, it's really understanding the issues and risks that can occur from both a business perspective and organization perspective. For example, from a business perspective, the CIOs really need to understand the chat and challenges the staff and really understand business dependencies, right? It's, what that bureau, what that principal office needs to do their job, really understand their mission requirements. From an organization perspective, is also building that muscle memory, really helping it instinctively collaborate together. And what I mean collaborating, it's not just within the IT shop, it's across, it's the CFO, it's the CAO. You look at across a broad of everything you need to do to deliver those services, making sure that your acquisitions are aligned to the services needed, making sure the funding's there to support current and future needs, and really making it really coherent. Also, from an aspect of the team being very coherent, the high tempo that occurs, making sure business processes are built out, resilient to be able to ensure that not as also to address the known risk and issues that may be occurring, but also to pivot to and be able to manage those unknown risks. Because that's usually where we get hit at, right? Those are the times when things pop up and stuff, and it's really understanding that. So making sure your staff throughout are working collectively and communicating across, not just internal, not just between your branches and everything, but also external, talking to that contract officer and really understanding and making sure things are there, talking to making sure that we have that funding lined up and really making sure, you don't want to get out there and rolling something out and not realize that you don't have the necessary funding to complete the project, or making sure that those things that are necessary from the business perspective, talking to those offices and making sure that the services they need to be able to do their jobs, that's really we're in sync with them. So really it's important to take that complete 360 view, build those bridges across the different offices that are external to the CIO, in addition to internal, making sure they're sustained.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you for kicking us off. And for the panelists, if you're ready to respond, you just come off mute and then I'll know that you're ready to respond. So Stefan, I saw you there for a second. Go ahead.
Okay, well, Alan, thank you so much for this. And I really connect with what you said about the 360 view. And I can appreciate how important that is, specifically when you're trying to procure services that enable and enhance our resilience. For us within USPTO, resilience is really simple. It's basically our ability to continue our operations when disruptions occur. That's the simplest possible definition, but this is such a packed definition, right? So there's so much around that. And when you look at, as you said, only in technology gives you a high level of resilience because most of our organizations are technology driven, right? We rely on that technology to execute our work. In the patent office, we come every day multiple times through over 2 centuries of patents that have grown exponentially, right? And we got to look through all of them. So obviously without technology, that would be a very, very difficult process. And when you think about it, when COVID hit was a pure test of resilience and tested pretty much every organization out there. And I do remember March 23rd, I think that Monday, where we all had to go home, but we had to go back to work from home. So that was one of those pivotal moments in which we realize, yes, we can do it. And yes, we have fixes here and there that we need to do. And they're all both organizational, policy-based, technologically based. And that's how we come together. And now the question there is, how do we predict some of those things? Because some of them are unpredictable. You just have to be ready. And I think we're going to talk about later a little bit about the probability and the impact of different events that would trigger our ability to remain in operations, to be resilient. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Frank, would you like to piggyback off of anything that's been said so far?
Sure. I think whatever been said so far is pretty, they're pretty spot on, right? I agree with what Alan said, what Stefan said. And from my perspective, the title of this talk is, a group a group effort, right? It's really a team effort, right? It's got to span all the levels of your organization, right? From our perspective, right, we have operations that have to continue, forecasts have to go out. There's operations to support that have to be maintained. So you have to manage those risks to keep those things going. But there's a lot of research behind all that has to also be maintained. So it really is a team sport, from the scientist to the IT professional to the business professional. Because at the end of the day, right, our business is our mission. So we have to look at everything from a mission perspective, but incorporate all the different viewpoints from cyber, from IT, from the business units. So it is a layered, right? We have to layer all that all the way up to leadership, but it really is a team sport, and you have to approach it that way. Where, as you start projects, programs, whatever they are, right? You're incorporating those elements as you work down the path, right? From inception to kind of end of life, and that means building cross-cutting teams, putting them together, building frameworks that provide structure for all these folks to get to resiliency, but are flexible enough for different types of missions, right? For operational missions, they may be way more strict. They may be strict. For research, less so. But our mission is to move research into operations that, to improve forecasts and other products. So it's almost it's a life cycle process, and you have to think of it that way, right? It's not just cyber or resiliency, but there's integrity that's wrapped up into that as well. A lot of our work depends on accurate data to provide accurate products to ourselves, to other agencies, to the public. So you have to build all that into a program or a project up front to make sure that moves through its life cycle the right way, and so you can tackle the risks that you can see, and more importantly, be better prepared for the risks that you may not see, because they change, right? Stefan talked about COVID, that changes a lot of things on the IT and cyber side, and I think most of us were in a good position to tackle those because we're having these discussions, and that's the kind of thing you have to kind of build towards, right? Expect the unexpected. Thank you.
Absolutely. Ron, it looks like you had something you'd like to share.
Yeah, so I think Alan and Stephen and Frank all did a really good job of putting like the parts together of what resiliency looks like from an organizational standpoint or from a business mission standpoint. I think, and since I get to look at it from a slightly different view, because I'm usually coming into an organization and asking these questions, one of the things that I do tend to ask is, because usually a business can say, these are the technologies that I need to make sure that I keep running. They're not always easy for them to answer the question of, okay, well, what decisions do you need to be able to make during that process or during your daily operations? And because that feeds some of your resiliency aspects, because it's easy to identify an application or a technology that supports your daily customer mission set, but what are the applications or data sets that support organizational decision making? And sometimes those ones get left behind a little bit. It's like, oh, I actually need access to this database or this data set because I use that to make X, Y, Z decision, which drives my ability to support my customer, my organizations, or do my missions. But sometimes that one is one of those ones that doesn't quite always get decided until it's usually that old crap moment of, oh, okay, we didn't do this. Now what do we do?
Yeah, thank you, Ron. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to share while we're here? Charles?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I really liked what Stefan shared about resiliency, right? This idea that when bad things happen, how do we respond? And he gave the COVID example. I would add that in addition to that perception of resiliency, that there's a planning element to resiliency, which is the organization's ability to anticipate issues ahead of time and establish policies and procedures to mitigate those risks and bad things from happening. And so while it's critically important to be in a position, be flexible enough where you can respond to risks, definitely, I think Frank mentioned that even the best laid plans are going to have some gaps, and there's going to be emerging threats that are going to come about. You have those policies and procedures, you're thinking ahead, you're trying to mitigate risks, understanding that they're going to happen, and then be in a position where you can handle them by having plans, handle them effectively, and then also trying to make sure and think through that your processes and procedures aren't so rigid that when you do have an emerging risk, something that you didn't anticipate, that you're able to effectively respond from an organizational and enterprise perspective.
Thank you, Charles. Anyone else before we move on to the next question? All right, we're going to take a quick pause then and put up our first poll question before we move on to question number 2. So poll number 1 for our audience at home: how effectively is resilience measured within your organization? Please take a moment to respond to that. And then for my second question, Frank, maybe you can kick us off this time. When you think about business or cyber resiliency, how does risk management factor into planning for resilience? Could you please speak to that for us?
Sure. Well, I think it's a big part of it, right? Understanding, going back to the layered thing I talked about before, I think understanding kind of the full, or trying to understand as much as you can of the full kind of impacts of what decisions will be or where risk points may be is important, right? And again, we go back to frameworks, right? Look for best practices, really try to integrate across the value chain, right? We all work for complicated organizations, right? They're different business lines, different line offices, whatever our agency calls them. But it's really looking at the problem from almost a value chain perspective, right? Data may start in one organization and move to another. How does that process work through an organization, and how do we prepare them to deliver products or whatever that might be? But again, you have to have a. So I think it's part of the planning and inception process of anything, right? We're incorporating things like cyber into the process, and we're taking practices from not just ourselves, from other agencies, from the government at large, from industry, right? Incorporating those things in, really pushing across the value chain, again, so that we're thinking of risk not just for the component that we're worried about or the component that we're working on, but how does this fit into the bigger picture in terms of how do we deliver a product or whatever that might be. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, for kicking us off on question number 2. Who from our panel would like to go next? I'll just wait for you to come off mute. Charles, go for it.
Sure. Thank you very much. Happy to follow that. So when I think about organizational or departmental resilience, I'm principally thinking about managing risks from an enterprise perspective. As the department's chief privacy officer, I'm thinking about risks across the organization associated with the collection, maintenance, use, and dissemination of personally identifiable information, right? Or information about people. I'm thinking about how we ensure that privacy professionals or very candidly, privacy champions are integrated into our various risk management processes in such a way that we are identifying and mitigating risks across every tier of the organization, at the organizational level, at the business or program level, and at the system or data level. And at the organizational level, the level where I primarily and principally operate, I'm responsible for making sure that we have updated guidance, policies, and procedures that establish repeatable and reliable ways for managing risk across the enterprise. And through those policies and procedures, I'm trying to make sure that privacy is being considered from the very top of the organization down to the system development and implementation level. For example, integrating privacy professionals and champions into change management processes, as well as system authorization processes. And I want to go back to something that Alan shared at the very, very start of the conversation, which from my perspective, from an enterprise risk management perspective, it's important to be looped into the right conversations and communicating with the right people. For example, I'm regularly in contact with our CIO, with our CISO, with our chief data officer, with our chief human capital officer, with our general counsel, with our chief budget officer, with our acquisition team, with staff from our front office, our secretary's office, our deputy secretary's office, working with all of those individuals daily to ensure that me and my team are tracking things that they're working on and helping to ensure that we are thinking through and managing privacy risks across all of their business lines.
Thank you, Charles. Let's hear from Alan next.
I love what Charles said from that aspect of working across the lines and also from the aspect of working external too. I'm going to take it more from a technology thinking forward type perspective though. Everybody's aware about OMB's 2209 and the zero trust aspect of things, but we really need to thinking of it from that perspective right now. That is the now. But now we also have OMB 2302 that has to do post cryptography, right? And that aspect of that down threat. So we not only need to think about the now, but we got to really think about that future state, because we can't wait for those events to occur. So we need to collectively work together and build that resiliency of how the technology is delivered, the policies that support it, the process of business procedures we're going to use to instill that rigor we need. So when it happens, we're already there ready to handle the issue and stuff. We can't afford to that. We got to think about our PIV cards today. They're no use in the future in post-quantum. So we got to be ready for that before it occurs. So times to plan for 5 years, 10 years from now is today, not waiting until it occurs.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. Stefan, I saw that you had come off mute. Go ahead.
Thank you. I really connected with what Charles and Alan were speaking, and I want to kind of bring it back to the team sport idea. And the reason is, I think resilience as an objective has to be defined in a very, very high level across the organization. I think the chief executives of each organization have to have that as an objective for us to be really effective and to really progress towards it. The team sport really kicks in when you have different angles, different focuses being also represented. So obviously we look from policy perspective, people, tools. You look from technology, current and future as well. So that is truly a collaborative effort, and more often than not, when you look at such a level, you get to the point of the what ifs, and one of the challenges is really determining the scope of what you're looking at, and for us, what works really well is determining very small chunks and very specific objectives and trying to reach them, to have those 30, 60, 90-day plans and results, rather than sets, which are always aligned with the longer strategy, but always determining kind of the highest value achievements we can get towards enhancing resilience. And all of that is powered by understanding the risk of your business. For us, the largest risk is not being able to meet our constitutional mandate, which is to register trademarks and grant patents. That's what we do. That's what the Constitution asks us to do. So there's so many different aspects of that, both from policy, technology, people, locations, so having executives representing, being aware of having those objectives and representing the different areas of the business, collaborating in that and kind of directing the organization into increasing the maturity within resilience is really critical. Thanks.
Thank you, Stefan. Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think when people look at it, so I like looking at risk is my foundation for my resiliency, right? It helps inform what I need to be, why I need to be resilient, right? The risk helps informs that. And there's a part of it too where, because if I go to any CIO or any lead of an organization, a director of an agency, and I say, what do you want to be resilient against? They're going to tell me everything, right? And that's just not feasible, right? There's a degree of, when it comes to risk management, you have to take into account that you have to be, there are some risks that you cannot mitigate and you must accept, right? And so that has to be part of the equation. And so what risks you can accept and what you need to, and that helps me, what risks are viable risks, and because some are not viable risks. I mean, even like when you take into account like just certain types of cyber attacks or certain type of insider threat incidents, they may not be a viable to your environment just because of the way your architecture is built, whether or not it's internet facing. There's all kind of little nuances to it, right? So, so understanding what your risks really are help inform what your resiliency looks like. It helps, you can, that allows you then to say, okay, these are the things I need to be resilient about. These are the risks, and this is how I get to that, right? It's almost like an obstacle course, right? So you're running the obstacle course, you've got to run the obstacle course, but as you come to each obstacle, you figure out your approach to each one of them, right? And so that's you mitigating that risk, or that's helping you being resilient against the entire obstacle course. And in some of those obstacles courses, some of those obstacles you're looking like, I want to walk around this one because I can't deal with it, right? And so it's just part of the nature of what comes to, but understanding your risk really becomes a viable part of it because it informs your resiliency models.
Absolutely. Thank you. Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add, I think, Ron, that's a really good point. I think part of what we have to think about when we're working through these is what our risk appetite looks like, right? We're talking about looking in the future, right? There are some things that we'll do that will help us later, even if it's, looked down as it didn't work, right? It's not a failure, it's more information, right? So how do we structure ourselves to make sure that we're right sizing? I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but right sizing our risk appetite to make us more prepared for the future.
Absolutely. Quick audience question came through. Brian Myers says, Charles, you highlighted resilience versus inflexibility. How valuable would tabletop exercises directly linked to policies and capabilities be to your organization to sharpen and validate resilience? Tabletop exercises. Does that question make sense to you, or do you need it to elaborate a little more?
I think that makes perfect sense to me, candidly. In many organizations, you have policies and procedures that are incredibly well researched, well thought through, well drafted, with playbooks associated with a broad range of risks that the organization might face day to day, or these one-time risks that you've thought through, and they just live in people's shared folders or shared drives. When we used to have paper documents, and I guess to some extent we still do in the federal government, although not for long. OMB has mandated that we transition fully to electronic in the very near future. But without digressing, they live separate and apart from reality. They're done. A lot of time, energy, effort, and thought of talented people is put into these things, and then they never actually get pulled off the shelf or thought through until the bad thing happens, right? And so, doing tabletop exercise is critically important to making sure that individuals in the organization understand their roles and responsibilities when it comes to risk management processes, right? I mean, day to day, we as organizations know people come and go. And so just because one person knew what their responsibility was, doesn't mean that the next person who comes in and takes on their role will. So I think that it's incredibly important for a lot of different reasons to practice makes perfect. When it comes to these exercises, tabletop exercises can be an incredible asset and a valuable addition to any training and awareness program to help ensure that people day to day are aware of the fact that these policies and procedures exist and know what they're supposed to do when one of these things happen.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to that. I think it's very important. We talked about the muscle memory. So when you do the tabletops, it helps the team build those muscles that they need in order to act when it does happen. It's no different than having COOP practices, doing your COOP exercises. It's extremely important. And so, my team does that. We work with the privacy officer and other stakeholders in the organization to do these tabletops intentionally. And we also, when there's areas of like, okay, let's use this scenario. And we use the scenario and we're like, well, we need to make something even better. We change things because those tabletops help us identify where something may not make sense at that moment. We need to adjust so that it does, so that if the situation does occur, we can actually put it in action. And as Charles said, we can't not let these sit on the bookshelf. We've got to have those muscle memories built in so we're not sitting there reading it fresh for the first time.
I want to add on to that and piggyback of what you both said. I do agree tabletops are extremely important to make sure that our documentation is fresh, that the knowledge is fresh, that people are trained and they remember it, they know what to do in cases. We also have to practice it not on a tabletop setting. So, for example, our disaster recovery exercises are actually real exercises. You disaster recover into a different place. You have to show that you can meet a real obstacle and not only know what you need to do, but know how to do it and have practice actually doing it. So this is always this dilemma between how much can be simulated, right, as an event, as a disruption, and kind of this is where the risk frameworks kick in, where we talk about the most probable events. What can we predict most probably can happen so that we can trigger a certain scenario. So yearly testing our systems and ensuring that our tools and processes actually are not just resilient, but recoverable. Because that is a key portion of disruptions is, can you recover out of an event? I think that is very, very critical in those cases.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, and just I think I'm agreeing with everybody, everything that everybody said. I think one of the key things for me for tabletops is, and it's sort of resiliency, but it's the actually running through a scenario, whether it be recovery or some kind of hypothetical situation. I think brings together the differing viewpoints that you need to take into account. So you learn a lot from the outcome, whether it be good, bad, or indifferent. It's still information that you need. And I think that's one of the bigger takeaways from those types of events that we get, is that differing perspective and seeing the problem from different viewpoints.
Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
And just real quick, so I wanted to take a piece of what Charles, because Charles talked about the best well-played plans, and a very robust, well-written, well thought out plan. And with a military background, I always walk in with the assumption, and for years I act as a consultant coming into companies who are in the middle of an event where they're not as resilient as they thought they were, right? And so no plan ever survives first contact. And so these exercises, when we talk about the tabletop X pieces, and then take what Stefan talked about, like making them realistic, making sure that you're actually walking through the motions. And then the other piece that I would carry on to that is, because we are talking about this, generally like this audience, and everybody's looking at this from a technology, cyber security, IT kind of standpoint, but whether they're kicking and screaming, but drag the other, organizations into this, the operational folks, the logistics folks, the HR, because it becomes part of them when you're dealing with an event on a large scale, because it impacts everybody. And so the plan has to include all the players, whether they like it or not. And that's part of the hard part, because it always comes down, well, that's an IT, that's a CIO, that's a cyber, right? That's their issue. And it's not. It is a operational business issue. It is not a cyber issue.
Thank you all so much for that. Let's go ahead and pop up poll question number 2 real quick for our audience. It'll be up there. There we go. What is the most important part of building a more resilient business? So please go ahead and respond to that if you're at home tuning in. For our next question, Charles, maybe you can start us off on this one. I want to ask, what are some of the challenges to building a foundation for effective risk management through organizations? What are some of those challenges you've seen?
Sure. So I'm going to take a step back here and talk about a challenge that is broader than any one organization's risk profile. And I want to talk about it because it's not unique to privacy. And that's having the right people with the right technical experience and expertise within your organization, right? Certainly, one of the biggest challenges that the federal privacy community faces day to day is the insatiable demand for privacy professionals in the private sector. This is something that's been steadily growing over many, many years, but today it's really difficult to compete with private sector organizations, not just in the United States, but candidly around the world, that can offer higher salaries, better benefits, and fully remote work, to name a few things, right? And I'm incredibly beyond grateful for the privacy professionals across the Department of Commerce and privacy professionals across government, frankly, whose commitment to public service, protecting individual privacy, and maintaining individual trust in government keeps them in government. But almost weekly, if not daily, I see people leaving for opportunities outside of government. One of the biggest challenges that I used to hear coming out of the federal privacy community was around funding and resourcing. We don't have enough positions or enough people to do the work. But now, what I hear more often than not is that it's not that programs don't have enough positions or people. That's definitely something we continue to work on. It's just you can't find people with the experience anymore. And you know, the conversation around a federal data privacy law grew to what was probably a fever pitch during the last Congress. And those conversations have already started to pick up in this current Congress. And in the interim, I think that almost every state now has either passed a state level data privacy law or is at least in the process of drafting one. And when these laws get passed, organizations need people to be there to do the work. That only adds to this growing demand for privacy professionals. And it's just going to continue to be a challenge day to day.
Thank you for sharing, Charles. Stefan, would you like to either go off of what Charles just shared or express a different challenge?
I absolutely agree with Charles. Having the right people is always the most important thing, pretty much in every challenge you have. And resiliency, maturity, and risk management, understanding of what it is also extremely critical. There are several other challenges because they all stem from how people think about it, right? So if you have the right individual group leaders that work with you, and they really embrace the idea of ownership. I own my product. I operate the product as if it's my own, right? It's if I create it, it's if I depend on it, right? And not just I go to work and come back from it, or I just shut down my computer. There's a culture shift that is required for organizations to fully embrace the idea that resiliency is really above and beyond just the product itself. It is about who operates it, the customers that product serves as well. So, and also, how do you think about it? Do you think about it as just a compliance checkbox, or bureaucracy, or do you think of it more as a operational security and specific, very practical and pragmatic kind of principles behind that? Also, when an organization with the right individual leaders and group leaders understands and matures to that point, then they elevate the goals, the objectives that target resilience improvements into an organizational level, not just an office level, right? I don't have, my office doesn't have an objective for resilience just for us. The entire agency has an objective for resilience, and we're all part of it, right? So for example, and this comes as the effect of, yes, we have many products, we have many product owners, we have teams that have embraced ownership, and each one of us is looking at different angles, but ultimately it's a very high level objective. And I think having the right people, the right attitude, culture, the right idea about what ownership means is really critical in implementing.
Thank you, Stefan. Alan, would you like to go next?
Sure, I'll take it slightly from my hat as the CIO. One of the challenges throughout government is the IT debt that it's accumulated over the years. And there's huge risk, not just from a cybersecurity perspective. It also takes us where we have to do a complete different way to deliver new services. You have something sitting in a data center. It's this 1990s to early 2000 system that you had. And now you have to take a very revolutionary approach, change everything, and ensure that continuity of service continues. That's very risky. And because you're not leveraging, the cloud model has one thing taught us, the business model, is that we can take evolutionary approaches to delivering services. You can change out we get like Stefan said, we got to have the technology and hold it. No, it's the service we need. The focus is the service, being able to deliver the mission capabilities we need, the services necessary. So why do I need to have managed an Exchange server? I'm getting it, right? Why do I need to have the technology in the house? All I care about is the service. That way, industry can come in and change out those technologies without having the friction of acquisition, without having that friction of going through even to what Charles said, the skill set, the upskills, right? You can't, I can go pay a GS $150,000, or I can go out there and use an as a service and get those services delivered. And now I'm focused more of like, how to manage them and stuff. And I'm in making sure I have the right folks to help provide that managed service on top of that. It's a challenge. And we're fighting that ever battle of just trying to keep staff qualified to compete with the technologies that are out there today. And it's a huge risk. And so, and because of that, you become single threaded as an organization, and you have folks doing heroic efforts to just keep the lights on. And so we got to break that model of I need to buy a product, then I have someone come in and integrate it, and then 5, 6, 7 years later, it becomes obsolete. And then we're sitting there doing revolutionary type approaches to replace it again. Vice using a very evolutionary approach to where we can bring in the technologies seamlessly without having those current barriers of way we've been doing government for delivery of services for the longest time. So I think it's important to change our business model and how we have services delivered.
Thank you, Alan. Frank or Ron? Ron, go ahead.
So I think I think everybody brought up some really good points about it, like from those challenges. I think one of the challenges that I see is kind of twofold. One is seeing the technology risk, the cyber risk side, the same as the others, right? The other risks to an organization, right? So for instance, everybody has a chief safety officer in a company, right? And they have certain aspects to it, but their piece is fairly regimented, and everybody accepts the safety piece as part of the organizational construct. Financial risk. So even in the government, it's a very different piece, but it's, whether or not your budget's going to be approved and how much of that budget you're going to get, right? But there's financial risk to every other organization, and everybody sees that as organizational risk. And I know I touched on a little bit earlier that the cyber risk piece is always seen as an IT cybersecurity kind of problem, but then also cyber risk brings risk fatigue a lot differently than other risks do, because like financial risk is usually a once a year kind of thing. Safety risk is usually like an event-based thing, but it's usually very sporadic. Where cyber, and I know Alan can probably talk to this as a CIO, or actually any of you gentlemen can talk to it as CTOs, CIOs, and privacy officers. That sometimes when you're going in to see your boss, they're looking at you like, oh crap, what now? Right? Because it's constant. Like the threat is constant. The threat constantly evolves and changes, or the technology is changing at a pace where you can't necessarily do business the same way, like Alan brought up, like cloud, right? You can't do business the same way you did business yesterday. And you're definitely not going to be able to continue to do that business that way 2 weeks down the road or a year down the road or whatever. And so the change of technology and the change in the threat, there's a fatigue point. And then the bad part about the threat is every time you go in is like, well, yeah, I know we fixed this, but now this new problem is different. So now we've got to fix that. And so I think of all of the things, and like I said, I wanted to talk about the understanding piece, but I think the risk fatigue overall, I think, is a big challenge when it comes to risk management on the technology, IT, cyber side.
Thank you. Frank, go ahead.
No, and Ron and everybody else brought up really good points. And I think the fatigue part is in workforce, right? But I think those are some of the challenges that we'll have, right? Across all of our disciplines, whether it be privacy or IT or whatever. It's hard to, we live in a tough workforce market, right? Doesn't matter what specialty you are, and finding the right people and being able to jump ahead is important. But I think the approach that we take, right? And Ron mentioned things that like this chief safety officer, which we kind of accept as things that they're maybe don't change as much, right? I think the mindset, within your organization needs to change a little bit, right? Have a kind of innovation cycle, right? As a CTO, that's where I worry about the most. Like, how are we innovating things to make them better? And I think the risk and resiliency part and the processes around it is important to do that, right? The world changes with technology. The world changes with applications that we're all putting out there, or missions that we have to support. And so we're all kind of furiously trying to solve this with technology and science and whatever, but we have to kind of take that innovative mindset and stretch it out to kind of normal processes that we kind of take for granted, right? And make sure that they're all working in that kind of pace so that we're moving everybody forward and everybody's thinking of risk or resiliency in the same way.
Thank you, Frank. I'm going to go ahead and call for poll question number 3. So we'll get that up on the computer screen. How worried is your agency about resiliency in today's digital world? And for our panelists, please go ahead and turn your attention over to an audience question that just came through. So this is going to be our last call for audience questions. If you have them, please send them in now before we run out of time. But Chris Doyle asks, and whoever would like to respond first, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. Risk management requires assessing posture against a standard. So is it safe to assume that the US government agencies all use the NIST cybersecurity framework as that standard? Can you describe the mechanics of how you would implement or accomplish that? Ron, go for it.
So that's a horrible setup question. I'm just saying that's loaded. So yeah, you could assume that most government agencies use NIST as a standard, or at least the anchor of a standard, right? So if you look at SEC, a lot of the guidance that the SEC has come up with for financial organizations, it starts with NIST. And so you can, and a lot of government organizations quote directly, NIST directly, 800, pick your flavor, right, for what you're doing. And so I think all of us see that on a regular basis. And so, yeah, I would, and I'm going to make this really short so that everybody else can chime in, because I think you start with that, but you still, without a doubt, the most important aspect of it is taking the standard and then overlapping your business operations to it, your organizational mission to it, because there are pieces that, maybe don't quite meld with the way NIST is writing it. And so you have to figure out how you adapt around that. And so, yeah, you start with that as your basis for compliance. Compliance is not security, and security is not resilience. And so you have to take those things to build up to get to resilience. And so now I'm going to shut up and let everybody else talk.
Alan, go ahead.
So going back to that 360, and when we're going out and acquiring these services, it really starts there at the acquisition and that early identification. What are those standards that are out there that need to be applied against those acquisitions, and making sure they're built throughout type. My team builds that into the acquisition itself. So the vendor coming in to deliver the solutions, they know the expectations and standards to build to and support. At the same time, we as the agency responsible for delivering this, or the CIO organization responsible for delivering the services, we got to make sure that we're validating it, not just from a project perspective, but from a technical perspective. We got to look at it holistically, making sure that those things are being applied. 508 requirements to 853 Rev 5. Next one's Rev 6, Rev 7. We got to make sure that the industry is out there, and we're also being able to help move those. I'm also believing in reducing the risk of the business units and moving them up higher into the stack in as a CIO organization, building in those security capabilities and controls necessary to minimize impact to the business unit, and making sure we have a much broader enterprise approach to delivering services. But our starting point has to start with that initial engagement with the business unit to make sure that we build in the right standards, policies are being applied, and that way when industry comes in, they're looking at a holistic need of everything that we need to ensure that we got everything covered.
Thank you, Alan. Anyone else, or we can move on to our next question. Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly, as the lone privacy professional on the call, I feel obligated to speak about the privacy framework that NIST has developed to complement the cybersecurity framework that organizations and federal agencies are required to use. And so certainly as a starting point, if you're thinking through managing privacy risks and you're trying to make sure that you have a coordinated and aligned way of doing that, so that you're not having your privacy team think about privacy risks in a silo separate and apart from perhaps your cybersecurity or information technology folks, using the NIST privacy framework is a fantastic way to start that. And then building on that a little bit more, right? If NIST has very helpfully aligned the controls in 853 Rev 5 to the frameworks. And so if you want to drill down a little bit and see exactly at the system level, at the data level, how specific controls and control enhancements feed up into those broader frameworks, that's available to you and something that you should be doing, right? But I'll caveat it with, I think, many years ago, Ron Ross, one of the people who led the 800 series, the development of the 800 series publications at NIST. He's still at NIST, an absolutely fantastic resource for NIST and for the Department of Commerce, I would add. He shared that you could have a risk management process that aligns perfectly with the NIST standards and hold yourself against it, but still fail miserably, right? Because you haven't actually done the business of bringing it to life. You have a documented process where individuals are overly focused on compliance and perhaps to some degree like system level testing, and are failing to connect that work that they're doing with business and operations, right? And so if you're so heavily focused on the underlying IT infrastructure, you're potentially, and certainly with respect to privacy, when you're thinking about privacy risks, right? You can look at the IT infrastructure and not have nearly a full or clear sense of actually how the information data flow is working on top of that, right? There's a completely different business process for how information is used, processed, stored, and shared that relies on that infrastructure, but augments it significantly, right? And so thinking about how you're applying those controls and managing risks against those standards, not just at the system and data level, but also looking at it from the programmatic perspective, incredibly important to actually building resilience, to actually having an effective risk management program.
Thank you, Charles. Let's see if we can get through these next two audience questions before we run out of time. Just come off mute when you're ready to respond. Hunter Jones writes in, can you explain the importance of mitigating the insider threat within our government agencies, DIB partners, and commercial organizations? Even though the EO in 2016 mandated every government agency and DIB partner alike, I'm finding that the funding is lacking severely to address this important threat that can have devastating impacts. So one or two panelists who'd like to respond to that. Don't worry, I'm fine with it being awkward.
Okay, I'll take a stab at it. This used to be my life for a while. So he's not wrong, right? And I think part of the assumption was everybody seems to think that executive orders come with funding, and that's not the case. It's never the case, almost ever. And so when you're talking about insider threat, it's about, and again, insider threat is one of those risks that is very much a fundamental. There's an HR piece to it. There's outside organizations that help you tie into that, and then you have the aspects of, and unfortunately, when it starts talking like buzzwords, right? So I hate buzzwords, right? But start talking about like zero trust. Zero trust is a framework. It's not a technology, but using a zero trust framework, applying to your environment, and then understanding and being able to keep tabs on the people inside of your organization. And you have this interesting piece because that can clash with Charles and his job, right? And when you start talking about privacy, or actually that's not data privacy. Sorry, not data privacy, but individual privacy. And so a lot of government organizations and government organizations have the freedom of you have no expectation of privacy on a government network from kind of most standpoints, and definitely in the military you don't. Where commercial agencies have a different blend of that, and even within the U.S. government. So it's a touchy one, but you have to start with the fundamentals of the basics of security in an organization. But it's an interesting risk because it's got lots of complicated codependencies.
Thank you, Ron. Go ahead, Alan.
It doesn't matter if it's internal or external. You got to protect it, right? And I realize executive orders come without the purse change with it. But there's a lot of things we do that from the basic blocking and tackling, if we just execute and do them exceptional, even the cybersecurity training, right? So it's just about doing the fundamentals of what we're supposed to be doing as an agency and making sure that we're delivering.
Thank you. And then real quick, let's answer the next one for Brian Myers. would software bills of material reduce your overall risk profile or just give you a better understanding of the existing risk? Stefan, I see you're off mute. You want to go for it?
Yeah, I can take that. So as bombs, they help. Like, so every piece of information about the services you're using helps. Soon, actually, we're starting to require our vendors to submit software bill of materials for all the products that we're using as well. I think that's important, especially when you look back at the Log4Shell, Spring4Shell kind of vulnerabilities when they came out. Software bill of materials of products that we use would have been very helpful to identify impact plus radius basically extremely quickly. So yes, you have to have the data, but also you have to have the capability of analyzing that quickly. So to be really effective and say, you know what, I know all my dependencies and know all the sources of my software, where it comes, whether it's in the shape of libraries, open source, commercial, right, paid source. So all of this is important. You have to have the ability to analyze it and the practice of doing it. So that goes back to my original, my previous thought about ownership. How do you mature teams, product teams, to the extent that they actually look at integrating their products with analysis software that allows that kind of that visibility. Now we touch on observability here immediately, right? Which is in its own kind of universe of approaches. But ultimately, it's one of the ways, not probably the biggest way, but one of the ways that, and somewhat easier way to improve that visibility.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. So we are almost out of time. I want to give each of our panelists enough time to wrap up. So we're going to do a round of kind of key takeaways from this discussion, what you want to leave folks with, and on top of that, anywhere you want people to connect with you. So LinkedIn, Twitter, Snapchat, whatever your jam is. Alan, maybe we can start with you for key takeaways.
Well, I think the biggest takeaway for me is the business model we have to adjust and change to how we deliver the capabilities. I'm very much a believer of everything as a service. I think, as Charles pointed out, we can't keep up with the technologies and the skill sets today in government and upskilling. And so we need to look at the cloud model and consider that and adopting that in a broader sense, particularly from enterprise services that as the CIO I'm responsible for delivering. There's also the way we manage things. Our past has been this very program project oriented type approach to delivering services. We really got to get out there and start thinking about portfolio of everything that's IT and a product management approach and getting full services delivered. When we do that, we take a much more strategic that helps us align with the policies, help us align with the associated, how do we build the resilience in the organization, what we're going to deliver to what the current state, and be able to be agile to move forward to new threats in the future. And that will give us a lot more agility as a government to where when as a service, being able to change out the technology because new threats are out there without having to wait for an acquisition and make it seamless in the background. And they got their FedRAMP and they can change out the technologies and we're still getting the service and be able to do that and get us out of this life cycle challenge that we're having and with IT debt that we've built out, accumulated over the decades and stuff, and get to a more evolutionary approach, vice constant revolutionary type disruptive service approach.
Thank you, Alan. Let's jump to Frank next. Sure.
Thanks again. I guess my key takeaways are where we started, right? This is a team sport and we have to view it that way, but it's got to be integrated, not just vertically from leadership down or up from the bottom level up, but it's also horizontally. You have to go across your business areas to make sure that they're all either having the conversations or thinking of things similarly or working from the same or from a similar framework. But also, I think with all the information that's available to us now, where we talked about bombs a couple of minutes ago, like there's a lot more data that we can roll into our resiliency or analysis of resiliency. And that requires, looking at it differently, right? It becomes an integral part of your business, and how are you going to adjust to that? So there's a couple of things there. And I think those are my big takeaways.
Thank you. Charles, let's hear from you next.
Sure, thank you. I think the key takeaway for me, at least, and what I hope that people walk away with is that organizational resiliency is a team effort, right? It's come up across many of the questions that we've talked through and answered, and across many of the thoughts and perspectives that the speakers have shared. It's incredibly important that resilience and business resiliency be considered. And then I loved what was just shared about, north, south, east, west, right, across the entire enterprise. It's incredibly important that it be tracked as an organizational or perhaps an enterprise KPI, right, that the most senior leaders are thinking about across the various divisions or business lines of the organization. And I know that there's been a very heavy investment, and some of the focus of this conversation has been on cyber resiliency, which is critically important. But the last thing that I would say is that again, focusing solely or overly so on cyber resiliency is probably going to result in some of the other elements within your organization that have a very critical role to play when it comes to operational resiliency, being understaffed, under-resourced, and underfunded, right? And that's why it's really important to think about it from an enterprise perspective.
Thank you. Stefan, let's hear from you next.
Thanks so much, Charles. You stole mine. No, again, I totally agree that I think that what I would like everyone to take a key takeaway for everyone is make it a top objective, top organizational objective. We use OKRs. Our organizational long-term objective is to have world-class resilience within our organization. And there are many results that you can create over time. You can create it within quarters, you can create within different fiscal years, but always track them in across different offices. It's what's extremely important. We have shown as we moved from project to product management is that the office boundaries have to fall down, right? You cannot keep an objective within a specific office. It's a cross-office, cross-executive, cross-team effort. Another one is 6 frequent, small but meaningful improvements. A lot of folks try to make plans and kind of revert back to this project thinking of, we're going to prepare everything and we're going to get ready for everything, and then we're going to be too late because the world has moved way faster than we can plan for. And again, meeting those objectives is really understanding your organization fully. As a technologist, I have a great understanding about our organization with our technology, but I bring my colleagues, my friends, my peers to give me more understanding and visibility into the business itself, into the public relations, into everything else that I don't have direct visibility. So it is truly a team sport to be really effective at it.
Thank you. And Ron, we will end with you, sir.
Okay, and I think I can sum this up really quick because everybody brought up all the right points. I think they brought all, so it's the right people. It's approaching it holistically, approaching it as a team sport, approaching it with meaningful ground. Like you can't change the entire enterprise in a day, although we always try to do that. And I think the last piece of it is, in order for, if it is a team sport and you approach it as a team sport, then that means you have to practice it as a team sport, right? You don't have resiliency if you don't practice it. If the first time you're taking that playbook down is the day of the event, you're screwed. I don't have a better way of saying it. Actually, I have a better way of saying it, but it includes profanity, right? So you have to practice it. And that would be my last, piece. Take everything that everybody here on the panel said today and then practice it.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. And I want to thank the folks at home too. Great audience questions today. And of course, our partners at Cohesity. We couldn't do it without y'all. Our next event will be up here on the screen shortly. So if you like this content, I'm sure you'll like that one too. It's our ATARC Zero Trust Summit. So that'll be in person all day, 7:30 to 3:30 on March 23rd. Please go ahead and register for that. And we look forward to seeing you there. Hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Oh, and don't forget to respond to the 4th poll question about your CPE credits. All right, everyone have a great week. Talk to you later.